Let's talk about Russia. It is remarkably entering its third year of conflict with Ukraine. I don't think any of us foresaw that such a conflict would be going on for quite so long and be so devastating in its impact. In December, Wolfgang, Vladimir Putin approved record defence spending, I think a third of Russia's budget. How long can this go on for?
It's finite, but we don't know how long it can go on for. What he's done, not foreseen in the West, and the West miscalculated on a number of things, especially the economic things. He moved to a war economy, and if you recall, in the Second World War, there were similar effects, and there was sort of Keynesian demand push and the economy grows, and for a period of time, it is not sustainable, of course not. But from a strategic point of view, it doesn't matter whether it's sustainable, because it only needs to be sustained until victory or until some kind of moment when the war ends, and that's why this is serious. It's also serious because once you are in this war economy thing, and I think we're talking about 6% defense spending of GDP, that's a huge amount. Once you're in this position, you're obviously you're producing so many weapons that you might use it after the war in other areas. So there's still Georgia he could, and there's still obviously NATO. And NATO fears that he may be ready in 2030 to attack NATO. If I personally not sure that this is his plan, but it's I don't think anyone should or can think ahead that far. When he has this sort of capacity, there is a certain danger, and it means also that we have now to step up our defense spending, and NATO is already discussing a 3% NATO defense spending target among its members. So we are looking at this does have a big effect. Now there's strains in the Russian economy. This is no question. I mean these shifts are big, but he is he's a dictator. He's not what he does is something we cannot do, and this is why we cannot sort of measure him with our with our things. He has a much higher pain threshold than we do as societies.
You talk about but what is it like for Russian people inside the country? Because I think Bloomberg reported at the end of November that Russia may soon have to choose between guns and butter.
Yeah, I think it's not quite as extreme. I think we've seen, if you sort of look at pictures from the sort of Moscow shopping streets, people walk around with bags. Western goods are available despite the sanctions, and there's no shortage of iPhones. And there's no shortage of German cars either. The stuff comes through Kazakhstan and other Asian republics. It's very difficult to close a country of certainly the size of the size of Russia, because the Eurasian continent is vast, and Russia occupies a vast space inside of it, and there are many routes, and it's basically in the center of it. It borders China, it borders Mongolia, it borders various other republics, and it goes all the way to the Black Sea and borders NATO and Finland and Ukraine. So you see, this is going to be very, very difficult to close it off. And we have tried this through the banking channels, but the banking channels, our sanctions were not complete. We exempted certain banks because we were still doing business with Russia. And the West was, and this is, I think, where it went wrong. Had the West done a complete embargo, I mean, in theory, it would have had a huge impact. But the West didn't, and we just did what was least damaging to us. And several Western countries, especially East European countries, were still depending on Russian gas, so that was exempted. The Hungarians didn't want to go along with the oil sanctions, so it became very difficult to actually. The Germans had their special deals with Russia, so everybody had their own thing. So we got a minimum thing, so we could sanction Putin himself and his various oligarchs, but we were not able to actually build a coherent set of Western sanctions, and that therefore it didn't work. And I think the war is ending. But
you do?
But yeah, I do believe it's.
You don't think
this would be my prediction if I made one sort of daring prediction in 25 that the war will end. And
how will it end?
And it will end through. Quite simply, Donald Trump, he can't end it in 24 hours. That was the famous promise he made. But because the US is such a vast contributor to Ukraine, and if he simply stops this, he can insist on freezing the conflict. And his people already outlined the kind of deal. I wouldn't call it a peace deal, but it's kind of an armistice type arrangement where the current battle lines would become a kind of frontier. There would be a demilitarized zone on both sides, heavily guarded by the West. So there would be Western troops, not American troops, but probably, and there's already talk about France and Poland already talked about sending 40,000 troops as part of a peace mission. Ukraine would not become a member of NATO for a certain number of years. And then there will be lots of other obstacles. For example, the Russian reserves. Russia will want the money back. Russia will want the sanctions to end, and it will be a difficult package. So I'm not saying this is going to be easily done. And obviously, without Russia, it cannot be done. Trump alone cannot enforce this, but he can enforce the Ukrainian readiness to strike a deal. And we already heard Zelensky offering, a partition of his country. He's still insisting on NATO membership. I don't think that can happen. But, it's a beginning. It's an opening bargain and an opening offer. Russia has also made offers. I think Putin has an interest in cutting a deal because the economy is a problem for Russians. And while it can continue for a little while longer, I'm not sure where Russia will be in a year's time or in 2 years' time. There may be economic strains and things can end pretty quickly if you are a dictator.
Katie, do you share that prediction from Wolfgang that we will see an end to the Ukraine conflict in 2025?
I think it's likely we will see a halt. I think along the lines Wolfgang outlines of some sort of a freeze is certainly possible. I think the really big questions at this stage are those security guarantees. I think it's very clear the United States, particularly under Donald Trump, wants nothing whatsoever to do with that. There is no question of US troops being on the ground. But when you take into account European politics, my question would be how resilient such an agreement or such a deployment would be likely to be. Is it likely that a future French president would keep French troops policing a demilitarized zone in Ukraine, for instance? I think, the prospect of NATO membership seems to be slipping away. I think if European and American diplomats were talking candidly, there really is not a great deal of interest in that happening. That you have seen some suggestions here that perhaps that could be deferred. So you could have an arrangement where that question is just set aside for 10 years or for 15 years. But I think there's really very little chance. And I think there is an understanding in Kyiv that is moving beyond the bounds of what's realistic. But then it's really a question of which countries are prepared to contribute troops and how would you police a demilitarized zone like that? It worked on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea, latest attempt at martial law notwithstanding, was then able to develop into a very wealthy democracy, but that's because it had US security guarantees. It's because it has US troops still there, based in South Korea. So for Ukraine to succeed, to prosper, to survive as a free, independent state, it needs some sort of very credible security guarantees. And I think, that is going to be a real test over the next 12 months is, okay, who is prepared to contribute those troops and what sort of commitment are they prepared to make? Because we've also seen playing out in Georgia in recent weeks, I think if you're Russia and you look at that, you might think, yes, sure, we'll take a break. We can pause this along these lines. We will reconstitute our own army. We've already shifted the economy onto this war footing, so we will rebuild our strength. And then in 3 to 5 years, either the conflict unfreezes and we push ahead again, or we're able to bring Ukraine back into our orbit through political means. So I think even if Russia does agree to a pause, we shouldn't confuse that with any sense that Russia is thereby abandoning its objectives here. And the second question that I would just insert into this is how quickly Vladimir Putin will feel he needs to bring this to an end, because he feels right now, or at least we believe that he assesses, his troops are on the front foot. They are, potentially in range of breakthroughs in several points in the East. And if they can, for instance, capture Pokrovsk, a city I visited, reported from last year, it is a straight shot down the major highway from there to Dnipropetrovsk, which is a very important Ukrainian industrial center. So you can also see, the temptation from Putin's side to just push a bit further. If he can have a major push over the next 6 to 9 months, perhaps Dnipropetrovsk is within range. And then that's also the future of Ukraine's manufacturing industry that he has control over. He, I think, has every incentive, given that Donald Trump has advertised so extensively his determination to pull out of this and to stop supporting Ukraine, to push as far as he can now to really cripple a future Ukrainian state and to really jeopardize the political stability there.
That's pretty sobering for the Ukrainian people. Finally, let's take a look at what might be the biggest unknown for 2025. Although it all sounds pretty up in the air. Conflict in the Middle East. In the final months of 2024, of course, we've seen the Israel-Gaza conflict spread to Lebanon, then retreat slightly, the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas assassinated, and Syria's long-term dictating al-Assad family flee to Moscow as Islamist group HTS seized power in the country. Katie, what do we know about how things might develop in the region?
Let me divide it into within Syria and then I think the broader geopolitics of this. I think you have this moment of guarded optimism within the country now to see the fall of this. There are no nice authoritarian regimes, but this was a particularly brutal, murderous regime which has been held responsible for the deaths of, I think, around half a million people, who has used chemical weapons against his own civilians. The fact that this was done with Syrian hands, this yes had significant support from players outside the country, such as Turkey, but that this was a Syrian force which has brought down Bashar al-Assad, and which revealed, the absolute hollowness, just the brittle character of his military, which crumbled, which abandoned its positions, leaving a trail of uniforms in its wake. I think there is a real opportunity now, and you're seeing it. You're seeing traffic jams leading back into Syria now, as people, at least feel there is a prospect of going home and being able to work towards a more a better system. But that has to be tempered by, everything that we have seen, over the last decade and further. The fall of one brutal regime is rarely followed by a transition to a stable liberal democracy. And there are a lot of heavily armed actors who want a say in the government and the future and the natural resources in that country. So we should certainly hope that there is a stable transition now. And I think, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, has said and done some of the right things. There are encouraging signs talking about tolerance for all religions within Syria, talking about its own willingness to disband, to have a transition here. Those are optimistic, hopeful signs, but I think we should be realistic about the scale of the task. Relatedly, I think you are also going to see then this geopolitical tussle for influence. Turkey and Turkey's support of HTS was a big factor here. Turkey has its own scores it wants to settle in terms of going after Kurdish population within Syria. Iran has been extraordinarily weakened, or at least its weakness has been revealed over the last 12 months. Syria was a very important conduit for Iran to be able to reach proxies in Lebanon to supply Hezbollah. So the potential loss of influence in Syria, and we've seen the Iranian embassy ransacked, Iranian diplomats leaving in a hurry, that weakens an already pretty tenuous position for Iran with the massive degradation of Hamas and also Hezbollah, which brings its own dangers. I think then the question for for Tehran. And if you had, for instance, a Kamala Harris administration coming in here, we saw some initial outreach from the new president of Iran. I think there was an appetite to talk about sanctions relief, to renegotiate relations. There's really no prospect of that under Donald Trump. I think one of the only consistent features of his foreign policy has been this real antipathy towards Iran. There are some very hardline hawks on Iran coming into the administration. So I think Tehran will see little prospect from the US of any change in policy. Israel, emboldened, may perceive that under a Trump administration, this is now a very valuable window of opportunity to go after Iran, to really degrade Iran. So then the question is, does the Iranian regime pursue its nuclear program? There is a really dangerous moment here, with Israel feeling very emboldened, seeing the Trump administration come into power here and feeling that perhaps, this is a moment to redraw the geopolitical map of the Middle East and really degrade Iran's capabilities.
Wolfgang, I mean, for most of 2024, it seems that the West has watched on nervously as conflict has spread and progressed across the Middle East. How much influence can the West have on events going forward?
I completely agree with Katie that this is a broader geopolitical conflict between the East and the West. What the Trump people see, they don't see so much. They don't look at these things so much as isolated events. They look at this very much as a combined event. So this isn't just about Iran. This is about Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Israel is on our side. And this is the kind of conflict they're playing, and this is where the policy will be. So we are seeing, we've had this very interesting summit of the BRICS countries in Russia. We see a lot of relationships being built between those countries on both commercial and also on the military side. There's clearly military cooperation between both North Korea and Russia, and between Iran and Russia. And China is increasing the delivery of military or dual-use goods to Russia. This is very clear now that this is a broader conflict, and that it didn't look good for Russia what happened in Syria. But it's ultimately, as President Xi was saying at one of his visits in Moscow, this is a bigger battle. And the West is not so far, has underestimated that. And we kind of underestimated the severity of this sort of geopolitical conflict, and it's beginning to dawn. I'm equally pessimistic about the Middle East. We're seeing European countries already starting. The Austrians want to send the refugees back. Now, this is totally crazy, given that we don't know what's happening. There are German politicians who think, we have 1 million Syrian refugees. This is a very large number. It's not the largest one. Lebanon is more, and Turkey has more. But this is a lot of people. You can't send them back to a situation that is so unstable. Obviously, people voluntarily returning to Syria. We're also seeing people voluntarily leaving Syria on the other side. It's going to take a while until the situation stabilizes. And I think this sort of immature way of dealing with sort of international is very much represented by these sort of statements. Now we can send the refugees back. That seems, in some parts of Europe, it boils down to that. So it's all about us. It's all about our immigration policies, and it's never. There are very few Europeans who have or willing, and governments who are willing to think about the bigger picture. And this is sort of the thing that Donald Trump may force us to do. That if he pulls out of Ukraine, we have to basically be responsible for this. In this sense, it could be a good thing. It could also be a terrible thing if we fail at this. And there is I have to say, this is a possibility.